Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this special event, a marathon, not a sprint. How can we support Ukrainian refugees? If you're joining us tonight because you are hosting a Ukrainian refugee family, first of all, let me just say thank you, well done. The whole point of our evening tonight is to cheer you on and give you some practical and hopefully inspirational help to keep going. What you are doing really matters, and we're grateful. My name is Chris Kandoya, and I am the founder of the Sanctuary Foundation. It's a charity that's been set up in recent months, actually. We've been responding to the large movement of people from Hong Kong, and after that, people from Afghanistan. And I kept starting new entities, and I thought, you know what? Sadly, there's an ongoing number of large issues affecting society. Maybe I need a new entity that we can do it for lots of different eventualities. So Sanctuary Foundation was founded, and we've been putting on webinars like this to support and encourage people to come forward, but also help them with some of the practical things that people are facing. We do have another seminar on our website about children and trauma in particular. But as I was speaking to people, many people are telling me that they're really passionate about helping Ukraine, but have hit some barriers, roadblocks, challenges in their support of Ukrainian families. So we thought, well, let's get some experts in the room and have a chance to hear from them. So throughout this evening, you're going to be hearing from lots of different people with lots of different expertise. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. You can do that in the YouTube chat. We're going to ask you to be encouraging and gracious. You can be straightforward, but let's support one another. We're all in the same boat, all facing challenges and difficulties, but we could be a help to one another. So I've seen it in the past where someone's asked a question and other people have said, well, I've tried this and I've tried that. Brilliant. Have those conversations and cheer people on. Our speakers are all giving their time for free. We're grateful for them. So if someone says something you like, tell them. Say, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. And if you want more information, feel free to ask those questions in the chat and I'll try and ask them to our guests. So throughout the evening, we're going to be hearing from various speakers, including Rachel Poulton, who's going to be up first. She's talking about self-care and serving others. Rachel's been a foster carer for quite a long time and has particular expertise in caring for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. You'll hear from her in a minute. After that, we're going to hear from Susanna Baker, who runs a support charity in North Devon with lots of experience with previous sponsorship programs, including people from Syria. So we've got lots of expertise there. Then we're going to be hearing from a trauma specialist, Wendy Jackson, talking about trauma and long-term support. And after that, I'm really excited. We've got Tanya joining us, who is both a trauma expert and someone who's arrived here from Ukraine. So she can answer our questions from both personal experience and professional experience. And then at the end of our evening, some of you will have heard of the fantastic Professor Lucy Easthope, who's a disaster recovery expert. And you'll have a chance to actually win her book as we go through the evening. So that's our lineup. That's what we've got planned. It's going to be a jam-packed evening. We're looking forward to spending it with you. But hear this at the very beginning. I want to say, well done. What you are doing is historic. What's happening here right now is the largest hosting program the UK has seen since the Second World War. The last time this number of people were hosted, it was 10,000 Jewish children fleeing the Nazis in the Kindertransport. We have somewhere in the region of 55,000 Ukrainian people staying in homes like yours. You are making history, and we just want to congratulate you and cheer you on. Let's have our first guest. This is Rachel Poulton, who's a dear friend of mine. You might have seen us working together. We've been on BBC Breakfast together. I think we've been on some radio programs together. Rachel's been doing fabulous work for a long time, and particularly experienced in helping children who had lots of trauma in their lives. And Rachel, you're a very other-centered person. You know, you're always giving yourself away. But I'm asking you quite a difficult question today. What is it you do to kind of look after yourself to make it more sustainable? Give us some lessons, please.
Okay, thanks, Krish. Yeah, we've shared our home with quite traumatized refugees for the past 6 years. And this whole idea of self-care is something I've actually struggled with a great deal. And I think the first reason for this, and this may be common to others as well, is that it feels very indulgent. You know, we're living alongside people who've been through terrible experiences and they have ongoing difficult, awful things happening in their country of origin. And then we start thinking, well, what about me? How can I look after myself? And that feels a bit indulgent. But I've also learned that it is really, really important. We love sharing our home with refugees. We intend to continue, but I know we can only do that if we're just keeping an eye on a few things. So perhaps for me, that was the first block to self-care, was feels indulgent, but now I know I need to do it. Also, often it's a pretty busy life and we've lost our usual routine. So maybe our usual support structures aren't there. Sometimes it can feel a bit isolating when you're kind of busy with appointments and form filling and orientating people, to actually connect with the usual support systems we might have. So I've put together just a few little tips of things which personally we found helpful, and maybe some of those might be useful for others as well. I think first of all, I've learned to be honest with myself and not to feel that sort of guilt feeling if I'm frustrated, low, sad, often just a bit tired, really. But to actually kind of pause for a minute in the busyness and think, what am I actually feeling and why is that? And then to have someone trusted to talk to about it. Instantly, that should not be the person that you've welcomed into your home or are supporting, I don't think. But just have someone just that is always there and understands and asks the right questions. Personally, I think it's wise to avoid talking to lots of people and getting bombarded with all their responses, which might not all be helpful. And personally, again, I tend not to join loads of group chats, partly because I'm quite busy, but particularly if they seem to be the sort where there's quite a bit of negativity going on, it can actually just drag things down more than lift them up. I think another thing that's quite pertinent is this business of the fact there are quite a lot of us doing this now in UK, and we will all do it slightly differently, that no two households will run the same. And yet there's a feeling maybe of, I have to get this right. There's a right way to do this, or it has to be perfect. We are all just trying our best. And I think that's what the people who share our homes recognize, is if it comes from the heart, we're trying, even when there's the odd mess up. Interestingly, I have a good friend who I'm in touch with most days. She also cares for young refugees. And it was only after about 4 years that she said to me, I always feel like the ones in your home have a better deal than the ones in mine. And I burst out laughing because for exactly the same length of time, I'd struggled with the same feelings about her. And we just realized we shouldn't compare. I think avoiding the blame game is helpful. Often things aren't perfect. There's new systems at work here. There may be difficulties with professionals, with different agencies, with all the sort of form filling and submissions of papers and so on. And there can be even more blame, even more personally than that. Oh, well, this would go better if only. I think I try just to avoid that, because it's the whole situation that's wrong. It's the whole war. It's the whole cause of this thing. And just to avoid getting dragged into that, because it's not too productive. I think the most important thing, which is very obvious, and I'm sure all of you have thought of this, is identify what is helpful and what brings you refreshment, even if it's only for 5 minutes a day. And that's in mentally, like something a bit stimulating, the book you're reading, something. Physically, personally, I go for a walk every day. And if I don't do that walk, I miss it. And I walk around the same field. But whatever it is, just try and build that into your routine, emotionally as well, and spiritually. For those who find that helpful, we need to make sure that we get that daily refreshment, if we can, in each of those areas, even if it's just short. And if it isn't possible, don't think you failed. Some weeks go by and I probably haven't managed a whole lot of that, but I'll become aware of it and I'll think, I need to make sure I get back to building that in. Sometimes, perhaps at the end of a day that's not been the easiest, people can feel a little bit sort of trapped almost in this situation that's built up around them. And what I find helpful then is just to go back to the beginning. Like, why did we choose to do this? And what was our thinking behind that? And just to go through that process again can be really helpful, and just recharges the batteries, gets the energy levels up, and we're off again. And lastly, I guess I'd say, well, one more thing first, ongoing trauma. We know that our guests, the refugees we are caring for, supporting, will have this. They'll have it up in news feeds, let alone from all their personal contacts. There's also the secondary trauma, which will affect us as we get closer and closer to them. And just to be aware of those two things, I expect some of our other experts will be talking more about that this evening. Lastly, I'd just say find an encourager, find someone who lifts your spirits. You might want to follow Krish on Twitter as one of mine, but just find those things or people who will just give you that little lift when you're low. And yeah, I think those are probably the main things. A bit of a haphazard bunch of things. Somewhere in that mix up, find things to laugh about if you can too. But that's pretty much what helps us get through as a family.
Thank you, Rachel. That's so helpful. And those are hard-won, experience-based truths. So thank you for bringing them. I'm just wondering, what is it that motivates you to keep going? Because you have quite a few placements. People stay with you for a while, and then maybe they kind of move on, and then you do it all over again. Some of us are hosting for the very first time, and I might be finding it hard. What's your why? What's the motivator that kind of gets you going in this?
I think it's just knowing how fortunate we are. And I've said this recently to a family we're supporting. Well, of course we'd want to do this. What if the situation was reversed? What if that was my family? I mean, that's one of my ones. It's just switch it over and think, what would I want for my kids? What would I want for my family if we were far from home? That helps. Personally, I'm super fortunate, really, because we have been doing it a while. And we've seen some of the good things that can build out of really difficult, sad, painful situations. And it's not all happy endings. It's not all easy, of course, but there are always good bits to spot.
It's really helpful. We've got loads of different questions. Some of them I'll save up for a bit later. Sandra says, Rachel, that's exactly my reason for opening my home. That kind of empathy. What if it was me? That's really helpful. I'm just wondering, there's some people are asking about, is it recorded? Yes, it's going to be recorded. We can't do closed captions on this platform, but that will be available on the recording because we'll host it on YouTube. So hopefully that will help you. Lots of people here are either waiting to host or are relatively new at hosting. That's the other thing that we're hearing, which is interesting. What do you guys find helpful in keeping yourselves going? Let's ask that to the audience. We've got a really diverse audience. We've got people from the Highlands of Scotland. We've got people from the south of England. Great to see you. Let us know what do you find helpful to keep yourselves going in these kind of situations. Let's have a chance to ask that. Brilliant. And Rachel, tell us a little bit about your household, like who's in it at the moment.
Okay, at the moment we have my husband and I, our two youngest children. We have 4 young refugees, and we have an elderly friend who's 101. And I think that's everyone. Is that 9? And a dog. Yeah, that's us. And we have a Ukrainian family who lived with us for a few weeks and then moved to a house just a few doors down our street. So we spend lots of time with them too.
That's amazing. It's really good. That's something that's been really powerful in this Homes for Ukraine program. I was in Scotland last week and they did something amazing. They had the super sponsor program, which meant that you didn't have to find a sponsor. The Scottish government will be your sponsor, which has meant that people have gone straight into hotel accommodation. But the thing they're struggling with now is finding hosts that are willing to take people that were in the hotels. That the news cycle has moved on. We're not hearing about Ukraine every day. And some people who were initially really passionate are not so passionate anymore. And they're having quite a large dropout rate from people that said they'd do it and they're not doing it. But I think one of the genius things about the Homes for Ukraine program, whether intended or not, is that people have made a very personal connection with someone in Ukraine. And even if it's taking weeks for them to come here, that commitment, that relational bond seems to be the reason why people are still interested. And I love the fact that you've got someone living a few doors down that was living with you, but you've now got that relational bridge, because when you arrive, you're going to need some ongoing friends in the area that can help you navigate life. Brilliant. Was there anything else you wanted to say to us, Rachel, before we bring in our next guest? We'll be hearing from you a little bit later on when we do our Q&A together.
I might just say for the people who are still waiting, maybe have a look at building up. It's pretty obvious what your supports are, what your helpful things are, what's not helpful. Sometimes I don't access all of the emails I get, sorry folks, or all of the information that's out there, because that in itself can become a stress. And I've identified that as a thing that stresses me out. So I'll look for information if I need it, but I won't anymore read everything I'm sent. Advice.
That's a good idea. You know, if you are in that waiting game, and some people have been waiting a long time for visas, it does seem to be getting quicker now. A practical thing you could do is kind of build your resilience network early. You know, what your rhythm's going to be that will help you keep going. It's like I've got some rowers staying with me at the moment, and they're carb loading, ready for the race ahead. They're thinking down the track. Well, what resilience loading could you do? What preparation could you do? What network could you build? What research could you find that will make life easier when you do start that? That's a good advice, Rachel. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. We will hear you again a little bit later on this evening. We're delighted that we have Susanna Baker here. And Susanna is a co-founder of the Pickwell Foundation. I think, Susanna, you should tell us a little bit about the Pickwell Foundation. It's a great story of how you guys got started. And you're doing amazing work in North Devon. I've been in meetings with the civil servants and government officials that are running the Homes for Ukraine program, and you're always there offering really practical, helpful advice. So thanks for what you're doing there. Tell us a little bit about the story, and then give us your insights into how we can make our placements work.
Sure. Thanks, Krish. Now, you've only given me 7 minutes, so I can't tell you our whole story, but I'll tell you a little bit. So so as Krish said, thank you, Krish. We are the Pickwell Foundation, and we're based across Northern Devon. And we provide wraparound support for refugees coming from all around the world who are fleeing war and violence through a scheme called the Community Sponsorship Scheme. But more latterly, we've been providing support for those guests fleeing from Ukraine. For our Homes for Ukraine programme, we have a team of caseworkers who are visiting both guests and sponsors, and we try to assess and signpost in order to meet the needs of both, as both parties are essential to the working of this scheme and this whole thing going okay. So after we've heard about issues around transport, because we're quite a rural location, and questions about whether it's possible to collect your BRP cards and stay for a bit, but actually longing to go and visit home, is that okay? And can we come back again? After those two questions, we have heard a few of sort of, especially from sponsors, but also from guests, about misunderstandings around cultural, personality, or parenting kind of differences, and also trauma that shows itself through various behaviour patterns, nighttime disturbances, various things. And many, in fact, most of our sponsors are doing amazingly with this. And despite it being really quite hard at times, they're fully supportive and understanding of how unique and difficult the situation is and how broken their guests must be feeling. However, sometimes it is too much, and occasionally there are particular circumstances that have led to a sponsor asking their guests to leave. This is clearly not a good situation for anyone. And here in North Devon, we try to help as much as we can, but the offers of local accommodation, as I imagine elsewhere in the country, are starting to dry up. Unfortunately, the only option for our guests at this point is to present to the local authority as homeless. In North Devon, if you need temporary accommodation, and you could be placed as far away as Cornwall or Exeter, which might sound really close to you guys if you're not in Devon, but if you live in rural North Devon, Exeter's kind of a good over an hour's drive away. It's really difficult if your children are in school or if you started a job. In fact, it's impossible to carry it on. But it's wherever the accommodation can be found, and as we all know, there's a housing crisis, and that's really tricky to find. The process for presenting as homeless and applying for temporary accommodation cannot be started until the person or the family have actually been evicted. So this is a really awful situation for anyone to encounter in any circumstance, but especially after you've been through so much already. So what are the other options? The best option for everyone concerned is that they stay where they are. The guests stay where they are with you as a host for as long as possible. I know you've only committed to 6 months, but 6 months, that's great. That's that's still a good amount of time. Longer would even be even better. But as a host or sponsor, there were never any guarantees that it was going to be easy for anyone. However, there are things that can be done to make the experience easier on everyone involved. So my family and I lived with another family, and we ran a business together and raised our children together for 10 years. There were times when I felt so angry with the situation that I was described as having a go away face. I've edited that for the purposes of this webinar, you'll be pleased to hear, Krish. Every time my friend walked in the room, I would present that face to her, which she gleefully pointed out to me when we got over that hump. However, from the beginning, we made a commitment to each other, and we said that we would stay the course, we would set a date for review, and that we would always work things through relationally if things got really difficult. And there was something about making this commitment inside ourselves that kept us going even through the darkest of times. So we've been thinking about this, and there are 4 things that we found that might help the relationships between the guest and the host to be as strong and as understanding as possible. So just quick practical things. So number 1 is talking about your hopes and expectations. It's most helpful to clearly define your boundaries around your home routines and how you like things done, the kitchen, the bathroom, how you like the cushions on the sofa to be. But do this from as early as possible after the guests have arrived, rested, and found their feet. These conversations can only take place when both parties are likely to be at their most receptive. Our culture can often be that we shy away from these honest conversations, especially those that might be slightly awkward with someone who's escaping war who you've only just met. So it's understandable that that feels really tricky to do. However, there are a couple of things here. Firstly, there can be a feeling of real safety when boundaries are set. Everyone knows the rules, there's something to work to. It's like a guidebook, if you like. Second guessing what you as a host are thinking as a guest can be far worse than having just a straightforward conversation with understanding. Secondly, my new Ukrainian colleagues have taught me that our culture beats around the bush far too much, and to such an extent that they find it confusing and sometimes frustrating too. They would far rather we say it like it is. This is much more the Eastern European culture and feels more familiar and normal. So secondly, the second point is build a support group around you. And I know I mentioned this in a previous webinar of Krish's, but it's worth saying again, it is extremely hard to do what you're doing alone. Please do reach out to friends and neighbours and ask them to take a role within a support framework for you and your guest. There are so many people out there who want to help. Let them, and be specific about what you're asking them to do. From giving lists to accompanying to the job centre, filling out forms, making a meal for you sometimes as a family or a household. We would recommend you draw up a rota so it's really clear and that everyone knows exactly what they're doing. And number 3, we're nearly there, really work to gain an understanding of the cultural norms and values in Ukraine. There are many resources around this to help now. There are so many, including the Sanctuary Foundation course, which is hopefully a link will be put up for you. And also in North Devon, we did a sort of mini overview version of that, and that's on our website, which hopefully will be put up for you as well. By knowing more about the context from which your guests have come, there will be a greater understanding of why some things might be done differently to what you're expecting. And fourthly, take trauma into account in everything. I just heard someone say to me last week, they said, oh, our guests are coming, but it's okay because the children left before they saw anything of the war, so there won't be trauma. At least we won't have that to deal with. Actually, I'm not going to talk about trauma. There are experts on this call that are going to do that, but always take trauma into account with everything, every behaviour or interaction that you have, because there is no doubt at all that child and those children and the parent that's coming with them have suffered trauma. Anyone leaving their home, their family, their possessions, their school, their friends is going to be feeling trauma. So overall, I just want to say that it is incredible what you are all doing for the people of Ukraine, for our country and across Europe. It's a self-sacrifice on a huge scale, but one that we remembered not only in history, but also in the lives of all those that you've touched and supported. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Susanna. So encouraging. Wonderful, wonderful advice there. Thank you so much. We've had quite a few questions about moving on. And I'm just wondering, from your local experience, this housing fear is out there, and you've kind of told us it's real. Help us get prepared for reality. I mean, people have moved in, they've got to know an area, maybe their children have started going to a local school. After the disruption of leaving Ukraine and then setting up life here again, it would be very sad if those kids then had to move school to go to some more housing. What are some things that people could be doing now? Is there any practical advice that you can give us as we try to find local housing?
I think probably just a couple of things. I think firstly, if there was a way to make life more sustainable for you, for them to stay with you for longer before they are able to go back home, that's one thing. If it's not, if life really isn't sustainable and you've tried, you've done all the top tips, you've listened to webinars like this, you're full of the knowledge of what you ought to do, but it's still not working, then I think, well, for us here, and I know that this is happening nationally as well, there are all sorts of people who volunteered in the first instance to host guests. And for some reason or another, circumstances changed, or, maybe they thought, oh, actually, we'll just wait a little bit longer and we'll just see what happens. What would be incredible is if we had a second tranche of people that could come forward, that we could build a register and that we could move people. It's like, you've had your turn, well done, host, you've done 6 months, that's brilliant, or 8 months or a year, or whatever it is. Now we have this amazing register of people who are in the area. So that consistency of school places and work can stay the same, but maybe they just move accommodation for the second chapter, but it stays local. But that has to rely on people coming forward again and saying, yeah, we're willing to do it now. We know that we didn't initially, but we're ready now.
That's great. I like that. I think ideally we would all love it. I think the Ukrainians I'm speaking to, as well as the hosts, is if we can help people find their own house, that they can lock a front door, shields down, don't have to speak someone else's language, don't have to navigate when I can use the bathroom and the kitchen. And for my trauma expert friends, that idea of agency, I get to choose, is quite important in the rebuilding of life. There may be people on this call who have a network or are connected with housing. I'm working on some pilot projects with the Church of England. They're about to start up a new housing association. We're talking with the National Residential Landlords Associations. There is no quick, easy solutions. That's why currently around 11,500 Afghan people are still in hotels, having arrived here in the summer, in August. So it is going to be relatively easy to find housing for the Ukrainians because they're smaller groups, but still there is a national housing shortage. So if that's something that you're interested in exploring, drop us a line. I think you've all got my email because I put it on the Eventbrite, so you can contact me directly. Just another couple of quick questions while you're here, Susanna. A lot of love for the kind of support hubs. A lot of churches seem to be running those. That's great to hear. But some questions about national insurance cards. Does a Ukrainian need a national insurance card before they can start work? Do you know anything about that?
Oh gosh, I should know this. Where's my colleague Christy when you need her?
Okay, you could Google her or message her.
I think the answer is that you don't need a national insurance card. I think that's the answer, but actually don't take my word for it. Better find out.
All right, we'll do a bit of research in the meantime. But thank you, Susanna. Such helpful content and really wonderful work you're doing in North Devon. And it is a most beautiful part of the country, and we're grateful that you joined us this evening. Right, let's hear now from Wendy Jackson, joining us from a library. Oh, she's outside now. Last time I saw you
outside. The internet went out, and I am toggling on my phone. So if I disappear, my apologies. But we'll I hope this is meant to be.
It's working at the moment. Thank you for joining us all the way from the United States. I know you live in the UK sometimes, in the States other times, and you've been supporting local groups as well. Wendy, you're a trauma expert. Most of us aren't trauma experts. What do we need to know in order to be helpful to our guests, particularly as some of these placements are growing longer?
Yeah, it's really interesting listening to both Susanna and Rachel talk about the experiences, face to face with the guests. because there's a lot of trauma signaling through some of the behaviors. And so the first thing I would say is understanding trauma might be really helpful to you as a host, because you may be thinking that one thing is going on when it's something else. We put together all kinds of great resources, and we keep working on it to help you get that information. We know there's a lot of you out there, and we're just trying to really just educate you, give you some context to help you understand why there might be a lot of noise, or kids in different beds, or things of that nature that seem to be going on a bit. And the first thing I would say about trauma is that we experience trauma in our bodies, and it is a automatic response, and we're just designed to protect ourselves, to survive. And so when we're in a highly triggered mode, even if we're just moving, from one location to another, we're going to be a little bit more sensitive, a little easier to be triggered. And so having come from having to leave your home, maybe leaving people behind, all the things that you've heard from your guests, landing in England, getting your kids in school, living with somebody else, on the outside, things may look okay. On the inside, may be quite different. And so some of the aggressive behavior that you may be seeing might just be that fight response, especially from the children, because they're not quite so sure what's going on, versus where the parents more so made a plan. They had to make a decision. Do we stay? Do we go? What's the right thing to do? And they experienced that release of getting away, whereas the children still aren't really quite sure what's going on. Depending on what their language skills are, that could be a problem. All kinds of things going on underneath the surface that might be trauma related. And so, the best thing that I can offer is the To Be Known channel on YouTube. It's To Be Known Mental Health and Wellness is going to put out as much content as we can to help you understand what's going on. We've got a couple things up there right now that you can access. Really an overview of preparing yourself for having somebody that has just experienced a traumatic event in your home, what that might be like, how do you protect yourself, some of the safeguarding issues like what Rachel spoke about. So that hopefully is helpful. And then, taking questions like we're doing here tonight as well, and trying to give some context and perspective to help with the lines of communication and understanding, and just really focusing on the autonomy of the guest, and boundaries in the household, so that we can make this last 6 months or longer. And it's like having a roommate at university. We go through growing pains, and you guys are in the thick of it, and it's going to be something to work through. And this may be just the hardest part of it right now. And once that gets, some boundaries go in, and we get past that honeymoon of they feel safe and happy to be here, and you feel good about being able to do something for somebody else and stepping up in this manner. Now we got to actually live together. And, that's going to be just a lot of understanding and a lot of learning how to communicate. And maybe what you wanted to do is have dinner every night together and really welcome them into your home and community. And actually, it might be better to have separate meals and separate times in the kitchen. And then if you want to invite your guest for dinner, you invite them like you invite anybody, and vice versa. And so that you help with the separate spaces and boundaries, because that's what's going to make this sustainable. We all have our own issues personally, and now we've brought a whole nother family into our home as well. They've all had different situations leaving Ukraine, and that'll look different in each household. But they've had to leave their country, and that's pretty traumatic. Even if you just packed up and left, even if you haven't experienced anything, that's a difficult thing to settle into.
Amazing. Great. Good to see you. Thank you so much, and well done for persevering with Wi-Fi, even though, even though you're outside. We're getting a bit of wind noise, but we could hear what you were saying. So that's
Terrific.
Wendy, some people are trying to work out how you know what's down to trauma, what's just normal personality. You know, especially when you've got a kind of another language going on. Do you have any advice there?
Well, as you get to know, I guess you'll find out their personality a little bit. But when you're seeing a flight response, so this is people that they want to go home, and when they say they want to go home, they don't really mean I want to go home to what's going on at home right now. What they mean is I want to go home before the war. I want to go to work. I want my kids to go to school. I want to see my family and friends. I just want things the way they were. The orientation that I knew. This is disorientating for me, and I don't know what to do with it. And so the best thing I can think of is I just want to go back. And so those kind of behaviors of kind of wanting to run away or move around, that's probably trauma. Some of the aggressive behaviors as well, especially from the children, that's probably trauma. That is a very elevated physical self, kind of coming out of your skin feeling, if you've ever felt really anxious. And everything is, when I'm like that, I can hardly tie my shoes. I'm clumsy, and I do knock around, and I can sleep at night, and I'm hungry all the time, or I'm not hungry at all, or a lot of these things. And so these are very typical trauma responses. I wish I could tell you a magic formula that says this is personality and this is trauma. I can't. Because we all handle our levels of resilience are different. So you can't even say, well, this person went through this, so of course it's trauma. That's not even necessarily the case. It has a lot to do with how we're equipped to handle something when it happens. And there's a lot of people.
Really helpful. Thank you so much. We're going to be hearing from you again at the end when we have wider questions and answers. But you've set some really, really positive responses. People are very grateful for what you've shared. Some interesting results from the poll. I was pleased about this, actually. The number of people that would be willing. So how is the hosting going was the question. And good 47%, brilliant 28%, tough 19%, terrible 4%, and that's 165 people that have voted, which is, I think, most of you that are hosting have given an opinion on that. That's really encouraging. I often hear about when things are not going so well, but that does seem to be a minority. And if that's you, we're here for you. We'll give you every help that we can. But good to hear that many people are finding it good or excellent. So well done, everyone. We're just going to do a funny little thing now. And if you've got a phone that you might want to have ready, we're going to have a little competition. Later on in the evening, we're going to be hearing from Professor Lucy Easthope. And there's an opportunity for you to win her book. And in order to do that, you need to look at this little picture. We're going to put up a QR code. And that QR code, if you point your camera at it on your phone, it should take you to a website. If that's not working for you, just go to sanctuaryfoundation.org.uk/course. And if you have not started the Sanctuary course, you can sign up for it this evening. And if you do, we'll enter you in a little draw and we'll pick out some winners, hopefully during the event. That's what we're going to try to see who can win a copy of Lucy Easthope's amazing book, When the Dust Settles, which was Book of the Week on Radio 4 recently. And if you missed that, you can hear a lot with Lucy on Woman's Hour, and that was just really, really inspiring. So there you go. Thanks, Callum's put up the little sign there, sanctuaryfoundation.org.uk/course. It's free. It covers some of the areas we've been speaking about tonight, how to keep yourself safe, how to think about things like trauma on yourself, how to work cross-culturally. It's a really good course with expert advice from around the country and actually around the world on the issues we've been talking about this evening. Now, here is a treat for us all. I'm so excited. We're going to hear from Tanya now. Tanya is just wonderful, and she's arrived here in the UK because of the war. She describes herself as a refugee, and yet here she is helping us to help refugees. So we're so grateful for you, Tanya, giving us your time. Tell us a little bit about what you think it would be helpful for our hosts to know about Ukrainian culture that will make life just a little bit easier as we try to navigate some of these complicated issues. Thank you, Tanya. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Krish, for inviting me to this meeting. I appreciate it enormously because that's how really we can kind of talk with each other. Yeah, Ukrainians and British people. I mean, from Great Britain, not just British, because, for example, I'm living with family, with Spanish family, actually. And yeah, so I'm being generously hosted by family in High Wycombe, and I have a beautiful family, but at the same time, I want to share some things that I've been noticing, and I'm speaking a lot with other Ukrainians, and I realize that there is a difference in cultures, of course, and just a few things. Some of them might seem very funny, but they are existing, and maybe some of them you would notice already yourself. But at the same time, just maybe my story would help you to realize that it's kind of our culture. So one of the very funny thing that might be, because, most of the people that are arriving are women with kids. And for us in Ukraine, it's really kind of important thing to look nice, to take care about our clothes, about our manicure. Yeah. So maybe for Europeans, for British people, it would be really strange that Ukrainian people are trying to find, to make their nails look better. Or, for example, it was a very funny situation when another welcome event was organized in Longreach, and it's outside. It's with kayaks and outdoor activities, and I would be asked to kind of write in Ukrainian language for Ukrainian people, so that please take simple clothes that you are not afraid to be dirty, because they already realized that Ukrainian people are trying to put on like the best thing they have. It's kind of part of our culture. We do that in order to show our respect. So another thing that might be interesting to hear is you are so polite, you're so nice, you always would say thank you, please. And like at the beginning, it was really funny when I started exchanging letters with other people. Some people would write me like, Tanya, how's your day? I hope your day is fine. And like I would kind of ask people, should I answer these kind of questions, or it's something like, how are you? And you just say fine. What should how big should be my answer? Should I tell anything about it at all? Yeah, so it's about this small talk. Yeah, what you call small talk. Well, we especially in some areas of Ukraine, we just don't have it. We go straight away. We are rather direct. And this, being direct, this is a part of our culture. And some of British people I was talking and discussing it, they see it as like, they would say, oh my God, Ukrainian women, they're so strong. But yeah, they're just direct. They would just tell what they think, and without making it sound kind of nice way. And this one of the things what I want to talk about too. Sometimes even I don't understand what British people mean, because you are so careful to speak about things. I'm not sure what you mean. And now when I'm kind of going deeper into your culture, I understand that sometimes you could mean something different than what you are actually saying. Yeah. So yeah, please, I encourage you to be more direct when you are talking to us, because that's how we are understanding when people want something from us. Please just tell us. Of course, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be polite or whatsoever from both sides. Yeah, but this being more direct for us is kind of an essential issue. Then for us, it's very important. Food, preparing food is very important part of our life. We really love making food. And for example, there was this event I was helping to organize in this like outside place, and we organized this Ukrainian cafe. We would just ask people, please bring whatever you want, what you are usually cooking at home. And we had so much food. I mean, people from British side, from our host would organize a lot of different refreshments and food, etc. But even I didn't expect that Ukrainian people would bring so much delicious, nice, well-prepared food. It was amazing. Yeah, so it's very important for us. Maybe some of you would think, God, that you are spending so much time to cook, but yeah, that's how we are. We do spend a lot of time to prepare actually our own food. Then another thing that might be a little different is when you are going to sleep, especially for kids. I realize that kids here are going to bed pretty early, like 8 o'clock, 8 p.m., right? Well, for us, in most of the cases, okay, some people would probably do the same, but really a very small percentage of people. Most of us would bring their kids to bed at 9:30, 10, 11, something like that. Yeah, it may seems to be too late, but that's how it is in most of the cases. And yes, I realize that you can and you should absolutely discuss it with your guests, that this is how you see it, and I'm sure they will respect it and try to be more quiet, to make things in a nicer way, or even maybe change their everyday routine, which I found really great. I think that it's good to go to bed earlier and then be able to wake up earlier and have the best of sunrise, etc. Then a few more things I want to discuss is we are really, I mean, many people would kind of wash their dishes right away after they would, have their food. I know here it's more like for people, they are trying to use washing dishwashers, and that's absolutely great. I think that's very nice for energy saving, etc. And the same about electricity and lights. I see that here many people, even in offices, or sometimes they would have this dinner with no lights, which is for us in our culture, it's really something we are not through. We come back home and we turn on our light, even if it's now quite expensive. It used to be, they raised the prices for electricity, etc. Still, we would always have so much more lights in our apartments and our houses. It's I believe also kind of very cultural things. So that's about thing that you might see, you maybe already sing with your guest, or you can experience it a little later. And any of these things, if you look at them like at cultural things, at something that is different, that could be, if you take this approach, that could be really helping, and to realize that these conversations, these things, when we are talking with each other, this blend of culture is really very, very precious.
Wonderful. That's so helpful, Tanya. I'm watching the comments, and a lot of people agreeing that this bedtime thing is really different, and the directness. A lot of people agreeing with that. I guess that underlines what Tanya was saying. Sorry, what Wendy was saying, Rachel was saying earlier. Trying to speak things out, and particularly if Ukrainians are a more direct culture, having those difficult conversations. I think British people, as you say, we sometimes find those impolite, and we don't
Yes.
want to have to talk about our children are going to bed now and your children are going to bed then. But I guess
And we don't understand you.
we want to be good hosts, but we want to be accommodating, but we also want to try and live together under one roof. So trying to set up some clear understanding and expectations does seem to be really important. So thank you for that. Lots of comments about food, and some people are lucky enough to be living with Ukrainian chefs, and they're cooking amazing food. I have tried palanitsa, which is an amazing little, almost like a Cornish pasty in texture with a bit of dill. And apparently,
Yeah.
how you say that is a way of telling whether someone is Ukrainian or
Right,
Russian.
exactly.
Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And you
So I
did
hope
it
I passed
so
the test.
well that we wouldn't realize that you are not Ukrainian.
Oh, phew. Good. I'm glad to hear it. That's good. Brilliant. Well,
Yeah.
lots of love for you in the comments. Thank you for what you shared, and thank you for investing in this event. I know it's a tough time for you and your family, but we're really grateful that you were able to be with us. Stick around, because we're going to have a Q&A with everybody in the room in a minute. But I'm so excited that I'm excited about all our guests, but I've been really enjoying Professor Lucy Easthope's book. And I haven't got very far because I only got it yesterday, but that the introduction alone is worth the price of the book. It's just very, very powerful. And Lucy, thank you for responding on Twitter. I was recommended to you by a friend of mine who runs a book company, and he said, you've got to get Professor Lucy on. So delighted that you could join us. Lucy, just tell us a little bit at the beginning of your work. I mean, I can't find words to describe it. You are a disaster recovery expert, which has put you in some of the most difficult circumstances human beings can be in. And I'm just fascinated to learn from you how you keep going. Like, a lot of us are doing our best to help with people that have experienced trauma. We're out of our comfort zones. People talking about compassion fatigue and those kind of things. Help us learn from you, from your experiences, about how you keep going under those kind of difficult circumstances. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege and a pleasure to be here. And I tend to describe myself as a sort of pessimistic optimist. So, I give a worst case scenario. I'm what's called a kind of wild card or a critical friend in these scenarios. But it's useful to prepare. So one of the things, today's event, I think, was called, a marathon journey. And one of the things that we say in disaster recovery is it's not a sprint, it's not a marathon, it's the hardest type of endurance event imaginable. And I think that's really important here. And it's not negative. What it does is kind of gird you and get you ready for the challenges ahead, and sort of perhaps thinking a little bit more stealthily and effectively. And I'm going to be quite tough with you tonight, if I may, just because I'm sensing a few things from the chat and obviously from the poll. And while the poll was quite positive, there was obviously people who were struggling. And so there's my Twitter handle. If you do follow me at Twitter at Lucy Gobag, one of the things I'll do is I'll sort of pose thinking points. I'll link to articles that might be quite analogous. As I say, there's lots of links with disaster and conflict and refugee situations. And so I'll draw them out. One of the things that struck me in the chat tonight has really been there's a lot of care, which is wonderful to see, but possibly also, therefore, quite a lot of paternalism. It's very important, I think, in this situation to really think of, I think it was one of the earlier speakers talked about supported lodgings. In disaster recovery, we've talked about billeting, which is quite a harsh word, but you're not there to re-educate, or your child's going to bed too late, are you sure it's getting enough sleep? You've got to be really careful, because one of the things I think the British do quite well is we sort of convey our disappointment in the same way as we are very polite and we're very thank yous and yeses. We can also be quite we can convey that it's not quite how we would do things. This really has to be thought of as more of a lodgings scenario. And I'm going to be honest with you, because I think it's important. Really, one of the reasons we haven't seen many missions like this before is that the disaster research shows it's very difficult. It's very problematic. And previously, we'd looked at it for things like mass European flooding or displacement, and we had decided that it was really too difficult to implement. Listening tonight has been really positive, because, I always like to be kind of reminded about how great humans are. And today has really done that. But I think it's really important going forward to be quite proactive about the next steps. And some of those would be, I think, being very clear that, what this arrangement goes on to look like. And I'm certainly seeing in the chat, and I think there's been a question just posed there, about sort of almost allowing people to stay in quite a stasis, which is understandable, a kind of stabilized, very, very, very kind hosting stasis, but really thinking quite forward about what next. And one of the difficulties we've got is, of course, we don't know where the war will go. But this isn't something where, for example, people have lost their land to climate change and they're having to move, and they're really going to have to make the best of it. There's obviously huge, strong ties back to Ukraine. And in fact, something that I've encountered just last week from a friend who's hosting is the idea of people going back and forth to Ukraine, which is quite an interesting idea. And I think has been quite interesting for British hosts, this idea that you would head back, perhaps see what the situation is and return. So I think one of the challenges that we're really facing at the moment is, what does this look like in the longer term? And I think because it's very difficult for the Ukrainian families to make plans, because they're still experiencing what I write about in the book a lot, which is called hiraeth, the love and the echo and the heart sickness for the home that existed. It's very hard to motivate people to say that's all gone, you need to focus over here. And I noticed some questions in the chat about, kind of malaise, trauma, people putting their pajamas on and going back to bed. These are all kind of holding trauma emotions that we see, where people, they're not ready to see a horizon. And I talk a lot in the book about the importance of a horizon. So it sounds like from some of your experiences in the chat, you're reaching a bit of a point. Some of you are obviously newer. Some of you are still very excited, and you've got refugees arriving in the last few days. But there's a sense that I'm picking up that those of you who've had you've been hosting for longer are really starting to think about what next. And what I would really urge you to look at, and I'll put it in the chat in a moment, is some guidance from New Zealand about being a leader. So it doesn't mean political leadership. It means people who light the way and lead people along the path in disaster recovery, and things to think about, how to frame your language, how to think about talking about the next steps. Honestly, I think one of the challenges you've got, we've said all along, is that this isn't being done with a huge amount of central government support, and there isn't a huge clarity over what next. And I think one of the things would be that your families, the people that you're hosting, will really need a lot of support now to do some quite difficult decision making about what next. One of the other things, and I would always defer to specialists like Wendy on this, but one of the other things is that it can be difficult to tackle trauma for a very ongoing situation. So you can't necessarily kind of put the trauma to bed and focus on the future, because this trauma is ongoing. It's being lived remotely. In the situation that I've got with a friend, they're constantly worried that they won't be reunited with family again. So you haven't finished with the trauma, and that's very difficult. So I think one of the things that I would be really clear on is a plan for that you're making through the summer for into the winter. Several people in the chat have said, we're heading to quite a difficult winter. There's a cost of living, there's the electricity, there's the power. What we find in disaster recovery is it's always best to try and look forward before it feels necessary, and even perhaps approach things quite early on. What's the plan here? And the other thing that you may be doing unintentionally that's so difficult to get right in disaster response, and I use those words deliberately just so we can access all of the tools, is that you may be doing too much. And so that's a really big lesson in disaster recovery. We do two things. We render people more vulnerable, really, by doing too much for them, and we render them vulnerable to future abandonment. So it's really important that you don't let people lose their survival skills and their sharp elbows and keep going. And you're facilitating, but you're not doing for. And so I think one of the things that, just picking up from the chat, is to really, at this point, use something like the New Zealand guidance, the Leading in Disaster Recovery, to be quite honest about your own behavior and really take stock of maybe you're falling into some traps, and that can be quite hard. It can involve some difficult self-reflection as to your own behavior. The couple of people in the chat have pointed at perhaps more severe trauma reaction, people not leaving their room. I think there was a young woman mentioned in the chat who was very, very sort of malaised and distressed and not leaving her room. That does need to be referred on. You urgently will need support there. That's GP intervention and local authority and signposting very gently, but is important, because that sounds like quite an extreme trauma reaction. The other thing we're seeing a lot so a lot of local authorities in the UK that I work with have activated their disaster management plans to be able to support this. And it's interesting, I was speaking to colleagues today about preparing for tonight, and everything that they've said has come up in the chat. Everything from kind of annoying little fractious relationships all the way through to big questions about, can you charge, which obviously is answered in the FAQs, but also a growing concern about things like mothers of the families perhaps finding work and leaving the children at home seems to be a very big theme, and things like, therefore, local authority and safeguarding and all of those kind of things. So there's some interesting challenges. the biggest issue, I think, as I say, just to summarize, is probably what next. And I'm very happy to take your questions on that. But also picking up the earlier point about your own self-care, I think one of the things about what will come next is that you're very this is the start of a journey, a very difficult journey for both the Ukrainian people and the country of Ukraine. And you can't take all of this on yourselves. I see a lot of people in the chat worrying about what if this happens to them, what if that happens to them. You are at great risk of secondary trauma. Now, that's not me being, me saying don't care. That's me saying secondary trauma can really, really debilitate. So it's basically you absorbing the trauma. And sometimes it can fill a bit of a void in your own life to do that. And then your friends and family start thinking, hang on, you've become very obsessed with something. So again, there's a useful checklist at the back of the New Zealand guidance. This was developed after the earthquake in 2011 that I would take a look at. And I'd also just keep an eye. I'll put my chat in again, my Twitter in the chat. Just keep abreast of things. One thing, it's not necessarily been the theme of tonight. Tonight's been very hopeful. It's not your fault if it doesn't work. So I've just posted on my Twitter an article that I've done in Poland, and the recovery guidance says these arrangements pretty much tend to last about 8 to 10 weeks. Some of you have gone much further than that. But if this isn't right, and it's harming you and it's harming the refugees, one of the things about this sort of forced altruism is it can mean you far extend your own your own comfort, really. I don't mean that in a sort of luxury way. I mean that in terms of your psychological safety. If it doesn't work, seek support early from the charities we've been hearing tonight, because that would be much better than letting this go on. And the second thing is, when or if it does fail, what it's sort of slightly it is a risk we flagged. It's not it's not something I want you to torture yourself about. If only I'd tried harder, if only I'd bought better flour or butter. Seeing the comments in the chat, it's not anybody's fault. This is what happens in disaster, and it's why we only planned really. It's why the government really haven't been hugely supportive of this. It's a risky business. But what I've taken from tonight is I am so in awe of those of you who've done it, and I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Lots of love in the comments, and well done. You're better at me that reading comments and speaking at the same time. I found that very difficult, but you're very good at multitasking. Such helpful advice. Thank you so much. I just wonder from I mean, we'll bring everybody back in a minute and just throw some of the questions at different members of our panel. But for someone that's been exposed to disasters over so many years and so many different contexts, are there any kind of quick wins, quick lessons for us about this, pacing yourself? You said it's the longest endurance race you've ever had to run. You've been running it far longer than many of us. What should we be thinking about as we kind of think about that longer term?
It is literally long term. So there is, you can try and kind of politically game where this will go. But one of the things that I always couch very tentatively at the start of giving any advice is people want to know how long this will last. So if we look at the pandemic, you were told sort of 6 to 8 weeks. That was never realistic. It was many years, and only slightly shorter because of some of the benefits brought by the vaccine. With this, you're looking at years of support needed. And it is interesting, you've raised some really useful things tonight. The idea of a second wave of hosting families, the idea, of better temporary accommodation. One thing I would say is, in all of your planning, whether that's a sanctuary foundation or as individual hosts, you need to be thinking longer term. And it's very difficult. The 6 months doesn't end on a clock. So really well into next year, be thinking about it. I'm also it was the first speaker. I really, really, I agree with all the speakers tonight, everything that's been said, but the idea of self-care is hugely important in this. And the other thing I thought was really poignant and moving in the chat was sort of the family who were hosting starting to get cold feet about the decision making while they wait. You know, often one of the, say, a partnership or a couple don't want to do it anymore. And I think you'll also see tension in host families along similar lines. So being really open to acknowledging the effect this is having on your family, and if your family circumstances change, perhaps you're bereaved and it's just not the right time, seeking support. And these are all lessons that come out of disaster. The other thing to tell your families that you're hosting is, you know, as I say, I've just had a big piece in a Polish magazine, is that in the rebuild there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of wonderfulness, and, you know, good times will come again. So, you know, it's not all doom and gloom. There are good messages as well, and sort of keep spirits up, I would say.
Amazing. One last question to you before we just bring everyone else back. It seems our public imagination is relatively short-lived. So there was a while we were very passionate about Afghanistan, and then that kind of dropped off the news, and public sympathy changes. At the moment, I think we can see public sympathy for Ukraine diminishing. What can we do so that we're not kind of, I suppose, blown about by those winds and just on trend, off trend? How do we sustain this? Because
so I mean, one of the things that I think people find quite shocking on the guidance that I'll put in the comments, the leading in disaster recovery is the big low point in the disaster recovery graph. And really, I think because we use disaster recovery material so much in local authorities, we knew this would happen at about the 10-week point. And so we can literally time it from when refugees were arriving. And in fact, we set our clock for the Polish and German families, and we've been able to do the same. So it's about a 10-week low. So one thing I would say, you know, local authorities, I have to say, I know there's not been a huge amount of support, but certainly they were aware of that. So some local authorities I'm working with were ready to upskill and upscale the support at that point. There is an uptick of support. You must, it sounds miserable, but it isn't. You mustn't believe the big bursts of goodwill. You're not looking for that. That's too noisy and exciting. You've just got to keep steady, slightly below that. You don't want to get carried away. You don't want to totally buy into the greatness of human nature. You want a steady sweet spot just a bit lower than that. And that's, somebody like you's got that balance really, really great.
Oh, I hope so. Thank you very much. Wonderful. I could converse with you about this all evening. Let's bring our other guests back and then throw some of these questions out to see who fancies answering them. There was a couple of questions in the chat about, Wendy, it might be worth muting until you're speaking, just because we're getting a bit of wind noise. Thanks so much. I think the same with Rachel. We're hearing a bit of background from you. There's been a few questions from people around vaccinations. What should I do if my guest refuses to be vaccinated and I've got vulnerable people in the house? I guess looking at you, Tanya, with that directness piece, but maybe Lucy as well, you might have some advice for us. What should we do? Help someone out of this difficult circumstance. Do you want to go first, Tanya?
Yeah, well, I know that there is this issue in Ukraine about vaccination, and sometimes it's really difficult to convince people to do vaccination. They see it as life-threatening thing, and so now, especially when they are having their trauma, it would be really difficult. It might be really difficult to convince them to do something that seems to be life-threatening for them.
I guess, how do we have that direct conversation? Because should it be an ultimatum? Should we say, look, I'm really sorry, but this is a red line for us unless you're able to be vaccinated because of other circumstances? Is that an appropriate level of directness, or is that too much?
Well, it definitely can traumatize these people because, because they are traumatized already, right? Yeah. So this issue is not the same as talking about time when you are supposed these people to go to bed, or food issue, or saying thank you, or something else. It's really could be so I think it's better to do it with maybe somebody like a mediator.
Yeah, that's good. Does anyone else want to comment? What do we do about this anti-vaccination thing? Wendy, you're muted at the moment.
Sure how to do that.
There you go.
Okay, great. I would just point out that that's a difference of opinion in general in a lot of places. I'm sitting in Iowa in the United States right now. And
yeah.
So, a lot of these things that come up with our guests are not just refugee concerns. They're just everyday concerns. The things we see at school, the things we see behavior-wise. What it's really about is, do you want, how strongly do you feel about this, and what your boundary is on that. And I think Tanya's given us a good insight. They as a culture understand directness. I would give them the autonomy and give them the respect that you're uncomfortable. Tell them you're uncomfortable.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. Other questions was about having those direct boundary setting conversations or a regular review. People are saying, well, it's all very well having boundaries, but it's an evolving relationship. Can you give us some more guidance for that kind of regular review, how to do that well?
I think it's about resetting as things change. We thought it was going to be this was our expectation. We tried it. It's not working. Let's reset. And I actually think, based on culture, and American culture is fairly similar with Ukrainian culture in terms of directness, the Ukrainians have an advantage because they're just going to say it. And so I would just say, don't be afraid to address whatever it is that's going on in the household, and saying things like, just to own it. That's what autonomy is about. I'm uncomfortable, not you're wrong, but I'm uncomfortable. And the premise of the whole agreement is we want to help you, and you've chosen us to live with. And so if we understand that's where we're coming from, of course we can work together and work these things out. And we just have to keep reminding ourselves, this is what we said we would do. This is what we're asking for. There's going to be, some things are going to be bumpy. Some things are going to be wonderful.
That's good.
That's what this is.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, brilliant. Go on mute again just for a sec. Thank you. Perfect. A few people are asking, I guess if they haven't hosted yet, then almost setting an expectation there'll be review. So, maybe at some point early on when people arrive, saying, okay, we're new to this, you're new to this, why don't we have a regular meeting? And maybe even set that in the beginning, the expectation you're going to be having that could be quite a good thing. And those of you that are waiting, hopefully the things that the rest of us have learned ahead of time will be able to help you have an even better start. So that's the advantage. I know it's been frustrating for some of you. Great. Just checking what the next question is. I asked some of you guys what it is that Sanctuary could do. So Sanctuary Foundation, we're a very small charity, but we have a big vision, right? We want to equip as many people as possible to be hosts, to help you, to support others. We love this outpouring of hospitality that's happened across the nation. We think it's fantastic, and we're hoping that it will help us to help other people. Maybe you are aware that at the same time the UK is welcoming people from Ukraine, we've also set up a new scheme to send other people to Rwanda. And I find that a very difficult balance. People are people. Everybody's valuable. Everybody's got intrinsic value, dignity, and worth. And so to treat some people well, and I want to see that happen more and more, it is great. But to treat other people in such an inhumane way seems really unhelpful. So our vision is more hospitality, more kindness. Let's change the way that our culture is dealing with all vulnerable people. So we've asked you some of the practical things that we could do to help you. I wish we could do all of them. We're looking for ideas. It sounds like these kind of events are helpful, both from a speaker's point of view and getting insight, but also just people affirming each other in the chat. That seems to be really good. Lots of opportunities for people to just say, I'm facing the same issue. I thought it was just me. Few, that sounds really good, that you don't have to do this on your own. You're part of a team of other people. So I think we'll learn from that and try to put on some of these seminars regularly. We had a kind of taster of everything tonight. Maybe we'll do some deep dives so we can spend a little bit longer on each of those subjects, trying to help you that way. So just let us know how we can help. Now, some of you are asking for the code. I'm going to put it on the screen again. We haven't pulled out our winners yet. So you can use your phone to go onto the website and just put your camera on your phone and point it at the QR code. I'm doing it right now and it works, which is great. This is a free course trying to help you with some of those very important basics about how to spot if someone's being trafficked, how to help look after yourself. Some of the faces you've seen tonight, you'll see on the course as well, which is brilliant. The trafficking piece is a bigger deal than I thought it would be. I heard recently of one host that had a visit, or potential host had a visit from their local authority, and they found locks on the outside of the room and cameras in the room that was going to be used. So sadly, these disasters bring out the best in people, but they also bring out the worst in people. And that's why safeguarding and being clear about trafficking and people smuggling is really important. And so if you're new to this, come and get that basic training. We've had some pretty difficult circumstances happening in around the country. So let's get as clued up as we can. Great. Okay. Just before we call straws, or just ask for a final comment from each one of our guests, I'm just checking the chat. Yes, this will be available afterwards. And yes, the chat is preserved. So you'll get a double whammy. Some people are saying, I've been so involved in the chat that I missed some of the talk. You'll be able to see the talk. Some of you are saying, I've been enjoying the talk so much, I've missed the chat. You'll be able to review it at your leisure. And you can share that widely. We'll upload it, and I'll email everyone that registered so they get first dibs to see it, and then we'll make it available. We're also talking about slicing this up and making it in a bit of bite size as well. So if you've got a spare 10 minutes, you can watch something. So I'm hearing lots of love from everybody, for all the speakers. Thank you very much. Let's give you all a last chance to say something. We'll start with Wendy, then we'll go Susanna, Tanya, Rachel, and Lucy, and then I'll bring us to a close.
Last thing I would say is we're working on content addressing all of these things. So we have videos for hosts already posted, going a little deeper into this conversation if you're interested, on the YouTube channel To Be Known, Mental Health and Wellness. Tanya and I are actually working together with Safe Places in the Royal Borough to put together content for our Ukrainian guests on how to regulate their body in a trauma situation, and trying to meet the needs of our guests as well, helping them settle in. So keep looking and keep asking, and we'll address it as you ask.
Thank you, Wendy, so much for your contribution. Great to have you here. Susanna, and then Tanya.
So I would just say, reach out for help before you actually think you need it. So taking inspiration from what Lucy was saying about planning ahead, always plan ahead. Before your guests arrived is ideal to create your support group, but reach out, don't wait for disaster to hit.
Thank you, really helpful. Thank you. Thanks for all you're doing in North Devon. It's really inspiring. Tanya?
I want to tell you that even if you don't hear thank you from Ukrainian people, if you feel like we are too direct and maybe sometimes too rude, what I hear from Ukrainian people around, I'm talking to them like every day, we are really, really very thankful for everything you are doing, and we appreciate it eternally. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Tanya. So grateful for you sharing your experiences and your wisdom. Lots of
And
people.
I wanted to say one more thing for those maybe who didn't got through Sanctuary course. I just did it myself. It's just brilliant. It's one of the best course I ever seen in my life. Yeah, so
Wonderful.
please, if you didn't do that, get through it.
Brilliant. And I'm not even paying you to say that. That's very, very gracious of you. Thank you so much, Tanya. I'm glad it was helpful. Rachel, over to you.
Okay, I think as a host, you'll get some people telling you, you're amazing, this is incredible and wonderful what you're doing. You'll get other people telling you you're an idiot, they knew it would all go wrong, and you'll get exhausted. And it's not too helpful to belong to either of those camps. I don't feel amazing at all, but I know I'm not a total idiot. And just hang in there, be honest with yourself, be as honest as you can with those around you, get help when you need it.
Brilliant. Rachel, you're always inspirational, and it's been wonderful to have you on tonight. Looking forward to seeing you on BBC Breakfast sometime soon. Thanks for what you're doing. Lucy, lots of love for what you've been sharing, and some people have bought the books for friends and are enjoying it. Anything you want to say by way of final words?
Yeah, if Callum could just put the Leading in Disaster Recovery link in, because I think there's been a couple of requests, and you may already address this in your course. I haven't done the course myself, but one thing about disaster recovery is also about letting go. So one of the things about the importance of this relationship, very similar to other social care relationships in a way, like fostering or supporting each other, is that at some point your family that you're hosting may wish to definitely move on or go home. So one of the things we always plan for at the start of disaster response is the exit. And the family, for example, you may remind them of a very difficult time, and they may thank you but not really wish to stay in touch. So I'm sure it's something Wendy will be looking at, but certainly with a disaster head on, we plan for entrance, but we actually plan for exit even more. So I just, it's no failure. It's just the nature of life in disaster. So I just wanted to get that across, and just thank you again, because you've reminded me that humans are great.
Well done, everybody. Thank you to everyone that was involved. Thanks to Shelley for helping us on the comments. I wasn't able to do two things at once like Professor Lucy was able to do. So Shelley was me for the evening, making all those helpful comments on the YouTube. Callum, who works for a church in Bracknell, has gifted us his time this evening. We're really grateful. He's the one putting us in the screen and out of the screen and doing all the behind the scenes stuff. We're really grateful for him. Thank you to all of our speakers. Lots of love for you in the chat. And thank you to you for what you're doing. We are cheering you on. This is a historic moment. I was saying on Radio 2 on Tuesday, I have a little slot I do every now and again. And there's a guy that visits the local schools where I live. And he has a really, really sad story that when he was 7 years old, he found himself on a train, and he was waving goodbye to his mum on the platform, and his mum reached in through the window and gave him his father's watch and just said, "Don't forget us." That was the last time he saw his parents. It was 1939. This young lad was getting on a train to England. He was part of the kinder transport. That saved his life. He never saw his mum and dad again. They died in the gas chambers. But, you know, he's now in his late 70s, I think, maybe older. My maths is terrible. And he's telling the story of what his host family did for him. There'll be generations of people that will be impacted by what you've done by offering hospitality. So thank you. Keep going. It's absolutely fabulous. And you're writing some history. We'd love to stay in touch. We'll, if you sign up for the Sanctuary course, obviously we'll send you emails about that. If you're not yet registered on the Sanctuary Foundation website, just tell us what you're doing. If you're pledging to support or help, let us know. And then you're on the regular e-shots that we put out. And I think one of the big lessons from tonight is how useful these kind of sessions are. So watch your inboxes. We'll be having them again soon. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Keep going.